Welcome or welcome back. Today I'm sharing a tutorial for one of my new patterns, the Sylvan Yoke. Now you will need the written PDF version. This is not a full free tutorial, but meant to supplement that version. If you don't yet have the pattern and you want it, you can find a little discount code in my description, as well as a link to the full crochet kit on linebrand.com if you'd rather get the yarn and pattern all in one place. Here's a couple timestamps if you already know where you need to jump to. Okay, so to begin the yoke, the very first round that we're calling the setup round is our foundation row. So we're going to do foundation half double crochet, chain 2, and then yarn over, insert into that first chain, yarn over, pull up 1 loop. Now we're going to work the chain portion. So yarn over, pull through 1, that creates 1 chain, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops, and that's the half double crochet portion. So to do that again, yarn over, insert into the 2 loops now. You can see there's 2 loops we went through. Yarn over, pull through a loop, yarn over, pull through 1, and then yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. And you're just going to keep repeating this until you have as many stitches as indicated in the pattern. So yarn over, insert through both loops, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 1, and yarn over, pull through all 3. Yarn over, insert through both loops, yarn over, pull up 1, pull through 1, then pull through 3. So here we are. I've worked the total number of foundation half double crochet and I'm ready to join. So the pattern will instruct you to slip stitch into the first stitch. So insert into those 2 loops of the first stitch, yarn over, pull through, and then pull through the loop on your hook to slip stitch. Now the pattern will instruct you to place 2 stitch markers, and it's actually easier to do it before you slip stitch. So don't do your slip stitch until you've placed your markers. 1 into the first, like I just did, and then 1 into the very last stitch of your round. And this will just help you identify these stitches when you work the puff stitch round, just so you don't get confused by that slip stitch, because sometimes it can look like a stitch. So round 2, we've still got the right side facing. Now we're ready to work the puff stitches. So we're chaining 3 here. We are skipping the first stitch, so that marked stitch. Skip that, skip the next stitch, and double crochet into the next. So it will be the 3rd stitch. And you can see we've skipped the marked stitch, the next one, and then we've worked our double crochet into that 3rd stitch. Then chain 1, and we're going to work our puff stitch 2 stitches back into the very first stitch where the marker is. So we're going to yarn over, insert your hook into that first stitch, pull up a loop, make sure it's pretty high because later you're going to have to pull through a lot of loops and you don't want this to be too tight. Yarn over and do the same thing, pull it up to the same height as your first loop, and then do it 3 more times. So a total of 5 times, and you should have 11 loops on your hook. And once you're done, yarn over, pull through all loops. And you've just finished your first puff stitch. So now where my thumb is here, that's where our last double crochet was worked. So skip the next and then work into this one. We're going to work a double crochet. So you can see that's where the double crochet was. Here's our new one. Here's the skip stitch. And chain 1 and then puff into the stitch where your previous double crochet was worked. Now let's do one more. So here's the previous double crochet, skip the next, and double crochet into the next stitch. And chain 1, and then you're going to work your puff stitch, not there, but here, into the same stitch as the previous double crochet. So there's 3 full repeats. Skip the next stitch and double crochet right here. Chain 1, and then not here, but here. Puff stitch into that same stitch as the previous double crochet. It seems like a little bit of a complicated stitch pattern, but once you do it a few times, you'll get the hang of it. Let's do one more. Here's the previous double crochet, skip the next, and then double crochet into the next. Chain 1, and then puff stitch into the stitch where the previous double crochet was worked. And you are going to work this all the way around, and I'll meet you at the end. So here we are. I think there's 1 stitch left here. So your last double crochet is going to be worked into the stitch just before the marker. Chain 1, here you're working your puff. Okay, so now you're going to skip this blue marked stitch and you're going to double crochet into this orange marked stitch. So it's the same stitch where your first puff stitch was worked. So double crochet right there. You can remove your marker now. Chain 1. And work your puff stitch into the same stitch as your previous double crochet. So it's not the marked stitch, it's the one right after that, right here. And if the marker is getting in your way, you can remove it now once you know where you need to work. Okay, and once you're done that puff, your next step is to slip stitch into the top of the first puff stitch. So insert into those 2 loops right at the top of the puff, yarn over, pull through, and then pull through the loop on your hook to slip stitch. Now you are done round 2, which was the right side. Round 3, the next puff stitch round, is worked on the wrong side, so make sure you flip your work. If you haven't yet, place a marker or a scrap of yarn or something so that you know which side is the right side. So to begin round 3, we are going to chain 3, and then we're going to double crochet in between the first and second puff. There's a little space here. All the stitches in this round are going to be worked into these spaces. And then we're going to chain 1 and work a puff stitch, but you are going to work it over the join. So it'll be in this space here between the join and that puff. Yarn over, insert into that space, and work your puff stitch. It's done this way just so that the join is a little bit more hidden, looks a little more inconspicuous when you're wearing it. It's a little harder to tell where you joined your work. So continuing on, we are going to skip the next space and then double crochet into the next, so right here. There's our double crochet, then chain 1, and you're going to work the puff stitch into the previous space. So that skipped space. and skip the next space and double crochet into the next. Skip that, work it here. It's very similar to the last round that we just worked, just with a few changes since all the stitches are worked into the spaces. So here's where you're going to work your next puff stitch. Skip this space here and double crochet into this space. Chain 1 and work your puff stitch into the same space as your previous double crochet. Skip this, double crochet here. Chain 1 and work your puff into the previous space, the same space as the last double crochet. And I think you're probably getting the hang of it now, so keep on going all the way around and I'll meet you at the end when there's one stitch left. So for your last stitch, you are going to double crochet into the same space that your first puff stitch was worked into. Then chain 1 and work your last puff stitch into that last space. And when you're done, you're just going to do one tiny difference from the last round. You're going to chain 1 and then slip stitch. So insert your hook into the top 2 loops of that first puff and pull up the loop and pull through the loop on your hook to slip stitch. Now the next round is worked with the right side facing, so we are going to turn once again to have the right side facing us. Chain 1 and you're going to work 2 half double crochet into the first space. So 1, 2, and then you are going to work 3 half double crochet into the next space. And you're going to alternate 2, then 3, then 2, then 3. There we've got 3. So next one is 2. So work 2 half double crochet. And then 3 into the next, and you get the gist. So keep on going, 2 into the next, then 3. And keep on going and join your round. The rest of the yoke is pretty much worked the same way. If you know how to do the rounds we just went over, you'll be good. So here we are at the end of our yoke. We're just finishing the last round before the short rows. So here we are, just slip stitching to join this last round. Okay, so now we're going to begin the short rows. Here we are on row 1. The right side is still facing you, so you're not turning your work or anything. You're going to chain 1, and then depending on what size you're following, you are going to half double crochet in however many stitches the pattern indicates here. So these stitches will be the back edge of your top. And now I've worked across, snip your yarn, pull it through with your hook, just give it a little tug like this, and we will weave that in later, so just leave it for now. And return to the beginning of your row. Join your yarn into the first stitch. So here you're going to insert into those 2 loops of the first stitch. It's a little tricky sometimes. Grab your yarn and slip stitch to join. You can also do a standing half double crochet stitch if you prefer. I'm just doing it this way. And the reason we're stitching across like this is because up until now we've been working in a spiral, and if we were to just turn our work and work back in the other direction, you'd be able to tell and it would look different. So here we are, we're just gonna rejoin and work across so that all the stitches look the same. So half double crochet into each stitch across, Be careful once you reach that last stitch because you don't want to drop it. So hold on to the tail and stitch right there. You can see we've just worked into that last stitch. And you are going to snip this row as well. And pull your hook up. There we go. And up until now, you may have noticed that the first puff stitch row also has the right side facing. So we are going to have to do this once more. Rejoin once more so that the correct side of your work is facing you. Insert into the top 2 loops of the stitch and rejoin your yarn. We are going to begin the row by working a chain 3 and placing a marker around this chain, because later on you're going to want to be able to identify the space that is later created by this chain. So there will be a little chain space and you're going to need to work into that chain space, and it can be a little tricky to see. So then into the 3rd stitch you're going to work a double crochet, chain 1, and then work your first puff stitch into the first stitch. It can be a little tricky to find, so make sure you're working into the right spot. So now you're going to keep doing the same pattern that you've been doing up until now. You know how to do this. You're going to skip a stitch, work a double crochet, a chain 1, and then work a puff stitch into the same stitch as the previous double crochet. So keep working across this row and I will meet you at the end and show you how to finish the row. So here's our last stitch. The last double crochet will be placed into the last stitch. Work your chain 1 and your puff stitch. Then the very last step is to work a double crochet into that last stitch. The same stitch you just worked that previous double crochet into. Now you're going to turn your work because for the next puff stitch row we need the wrong side facing. To begin this row, you'll chain 3 and then you're going to do the same thing as you did for the first puff stitch row. You're going to place a stitch marker around this chain just to help you identify this chain space later on. Double crochet into that first space here between the first and second puff stitch, chain 1, and then work your first puff stitch before the first puff stitch of the previous row. Then you will double crochet into that next space, chain 1, and then puff stitch into the previous space. Double crochet into the next space, chain 1, and puff stitch into the previous space. Now you know how to do this, so I'll meet you at the end of the row. Here we are, we've got a couple stitches left, double crochet, chain 1, work our puff, and you are going to work your last double crochet. Almost ready. There we go. We can work our last double crochet into this marked space. So double crochet, chain 1, and then place your puff stitch into that space there. And then double crochet once again into that marked space to finish off the row. Now you're going to turn your work because we want the right side facing once again. To begin the row, chain 1, work 2 half double crochet into the first space before the first puff and in each space across. Once you reach the last space with the marker, work 1 half double crochet into that space. And now the row is finished. Snip your yarn and pull your hook through just like you did before. And at this point, you can weave in your ends and remove those 2 stitch markers. We're now at the joining your yoke section. Yay! So what you're going to need to do is find the middle stitch of these short rows. So here I'm just counting. For your size there will be a specified number, so the size I'm following says count 33 stitches from either end and place a marker into this stitch. So I'm just counting from both ends just to double check that I found the correct stitch. And once you've confirmed, yes, you found it, place a stitch marker there to mark the new center back. So now for the rest of the body, this stitch will be your new seam. Okay, so join new yarn into this marked stitch with a slip stitch or a standing stitch if you prefer. And I'll note that we did not turn our work, so the right side is still facing you. We're going to work across this edge to the end of our short rows. Chain 1 and half double crochet into that same stitch as your slip stitch and each stitch across. So here I've worked across the entire edge, and you can confirm that you've got the right number of stitches. It's however many stitches you counted to find that middle stitch. That's how many you should have. Now you are going to work a chain for your underarm stitches. So the pattern will tell you how many chains to work. And then the next part is a little tricky. You are going to have to skip over your sleeve stitches. So I'm just going to show you how to count the sleeve stitches. Now, this is the stitch that we want, but let's just look a little closer. So this stitch here has a stitch already worked into it from our short rows, so we're going to need that next stitch. That's the next available stitch. So the pattern will tell you how many stitches you need to skip over, so make sure that you count that number of stitches, and then the next stitch is going to be the one you work into, so place a marker into that stitch. Now pick your hook back up and half double crochet into that marked stitch. This is the first stitch on your front edge, the front edge of your top. The pattern will tell you how many stitches to work across in this section. So go ahead and work however many stitches the pattern tells you to, and I will meet you there. And then once you've got that, you can double check. I like to always double count on joining rounds just because this kind of creates the foundation of the rest of your top, and if you mess this up, that mistake will cascade through. And before we continue, I'm just going to rearrange the yoke a little bit so you can really see where these parts are going. So you can, okay, there we go. Now you can tell the short rows are sticking out. The orange marker is our beginning of round marker. We worked across the back. We worked some underarm chains. So this is our sleeve area. We worked across the front edge, and now we're ready to work another underarm section. Work the same number of chains as you did before, and then you're going to join it into the very first stitch along the back edge of your short rows. So you don't have to worry about counting sleeve stitches this time. Just work straight into the first half double crochet on your short rows. And if you're ever wondering where the top two loops are in relation to the stitch, the top two loops of a stitch always appear to the right of the stitch. So if you can find the body of the stitch, just look right above it, and the stitches, the top two loops that lean a little bit to the right, those belong to that stitch. And then to finish this row off, you're just going to half double crochet back to the marker. And then you can join your work in the round by slip stitching into that first half double crochet. Now I'll show you how to work into the underarm chains, and then the rest of the body after this is pretty self-explanatory, the same as the rest of all of the rows you've worked so far. So you are going to half double crochet to the end until you reach the underarm chains. So now here you can see I've worked into the last stitch because here's the body of the stitch and here are the top two loops that belong to it, and I have already worked into that. So the next top two loops is a chain. And it doesn't matter if you work into one loop of the chain or two loops of the chain, as long as whatever you do, be consistent and do it for all of the stitches. Once you've worked across all of your chains, you are going to work into the next half double crochet stitch, and it can be a little hard to identify, so I will just show you here. So it's that next, right here, these top two loops. So here's the body, here's the top two loops that are just above to the right. And then you are going to half double crochet across this entire edge, the next set of underarm chains to the end of the row, and then once you're done that, it will look something like this. This is the tail from your foundation chain. We've got the right side facing, wrong side on the inside. And we've got this lovely front edge that dips down thanks to our short rows. Next, we can take a quick look at the sleeves. We've got the underarm section here created by our chains. We've got our short rows here. And then we've got all of these stitches that were part of the last yoke round. So you can think of our sleeve as divided into 3 sections. You are going to need to place a marker into the first sleeve stitch from the yoke round. And to do this, we are going to see where the short row was worked into the yoke. And then the next available stitch would be the first sleeve stitch. So same as how you had to skip over these sleeve stitches and count them, same exact thing. So you'll place a marker into the first sleeve stitch and the last sleeve stitch. And after you've done this, you probably will want to double count. Just make sure you've got the right number. You can go back and check your joining round to be sure you have the correct count. This is what your sleeve will look like when you are ready to work your first sleeve round. You've got 2 markers placed, all these skip sleeve stitches, your underarm stitches, and you've got the space where your short rows were worked. To begin the round, you're going to insert your hook into the center of your underarm stitches. I'm going to use a contrasting color just so you can really see what I'm doing here. Chain 1, and then you're going to work however many half double crochet the pattern tells you to across these underarm chains. There are the exact number of stitches worked that you need, but sometimes it's okay if you don't get the stitch right into the existing stitch. Like if you need to kind of make up a stitch, as long as you have the right count, you won't be able to tell. So we've worked across our underarm. Now we're ready to work 10 stitches evenly in this short row space. So you're working into the edges of your short row. It might take you a couple tries working 10 stitches, ripping out, working 10 stitches, because it's a little tricky to get them even since the rows aren't all the exact same size. But just do your best. As long as you have 10 stitches worked up until the marker, you're good. And then the marker is designating the first sleeve stitch from the yoke, so the first of this next section. And you're going to half double crochet in each stitch up to and including the next marker. So stitch into the first marked stitch and then keep on stitching until you reach the next marker and work into that marked stitch as well. Now after this marker and before our underarm stitches, you're going to work one more stitch. So place one stitch right after that marker. And then work the remainder of your underarm stitches. The reason we just added that one stitch was because without it, there's a little bit of a gap left. So we just wanted to fill that gap. And once you're done, you can slip stitch to join. And the other sleeve is worked the exact same way, except the short rows will appear on the opposite side. So that's it. That's all what I thought were the tricky bits. If there are any other parts of this pattern that confuse you or you have any questions, please send me an email and I will be happy to help. Now, I hope you found this video helpful. This is still one of my very first videos ever, so I hope you aren't too hard on me. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.